Hello and welcome to the program. We're joined by Danish film director who has earned global acclaim for his film which depicts life in eastern Ukraine. His film is The Distant Barking of Dogs, and it tells the story of a young Ukrainian boy who is struggling to adapt to life under shelling. We're joined now by the film's director, Simon Lereng Wilmont. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So it seems like such a difficult task to portray the horrors of war through a child's perspective. Now, how do you even go about doing that?
I ask myself that a lot of times. No, I think one of the key reasons is to spend a lot of time there, because time will show, all the small telltale signs of how people are struggling to adapt that you can't have for just going there once or twice or something like that. So it was important for me to go there a lot of time and to follow the family for over 1.5 years to get that kind of footage that I think was needed to explain, what are the effects of living so close to the contact line.
Now, what was going through your mind while you were filming some of the more difficult scenes, especially the shelling? Now, that must have been terrifying.
Actually, I do my own cinematography, and in both a good and a bad way. It works as some kind of shield in a lot of situations, because I'm concentrating so much on capturing this so I can show it afterwards, that a lot of times I think, it's like I'm not in this world. I'm living through the camera, and then it doesn't become as scary as I think it would have been if I didn't have the camera. So usually, I'm so into filming that it's not until afterwards that I start to shake a little bit.
That you actually realize and you process what you've seen.
I react afterwards, usually, yes.
And what was your impression when you met some of these families, including Oleg's grandma and his friend's family, who decided to stay against all the odds, who decided to live in a town where they can hear shelling almost on an almost daily basis? Now, what was your impression of them? Surely you made a connection with these people, and you come from a country where conflict is something that isn't discussed really, but...
No, I think one of the reasons why I also ended up choosing Oleg and Alexandra as the main characters, protagonists from this film, is because quite quickly when I met them, I realized that they have such a beautiful and tragic relationship, these two.
Why is that?
It's because that, they're in a very exposed position. It's a very dangerous area to live in. But despite all this, despite all the uncertainties of their world, they have a mutual dependency upon each other, and where Alexandra is kind of like the adult rock, of certainty that Oleg needs to...
The grandmother.
Yes, the grandmother, that he needs, some kind of safety, somebody to take care of him and to tell him that everything is going to be okay and be there as comfort. Whereas I think she looks at him and draws hope and optimism to give him that strength from just watching him growing up and being, as close to a normal boy in a normal life as possible. So that beauty, because it can disappear in an instant because of the shelling,
What did you think when during one of the parts in the film where the grandmother says that this is their land, this is where their home is, and she basically refuses to leave despite the violence?
No, at the beginning I was also, how can it be? But then again, it's such a nuanced world. They've been living there for 4 generations or something like that. They have a kitchen garden. They know they can sustain life from this kitchen garden. They've seen other people, go away and come back telling tales of, it's not better any other place, So there isn't any, in my opinion, I think it also has something to do with that there isn't any place to go. And I also know that Alexandra, even though she might feel like this, I think that she's constantly debating herself every second of the day. Is this the time where we just have to pack up and leave? Or can we stay a little bit longer?
That's such a burden.
It is, and
to
it's
always have
taking
that
a
in
toll
mind.
on her. It's very obvious to me. Also in the film, you can see that it's taking a toll on her because she's alone in a lot of ways with these worries, you know.
Right, and it must have been heartbreaking to also see and watch Oleg coping in such an incredibly difficult and dangerous environment. What was the most difficult part for you to film about that environment and Oleg trying to deal with it and find a place for himself?
That's a hard question because in a lot of ways, I don't see Oleg as a poor victim or something like that. I actually see him as a really strong, strong and good-willed boy, and that's because he has Alexandra. I think that you could find a lot of children who didn't maybe has a strong parental, rock being there for them, and that would be the real tragedy. But in this case, he really has somebody that looks out for him the way he needs to be looked after in these kind of circumstances. So I don't think that he is, as traumatized as I'm sure that there's many other children are in these areas.
So it kind of seems, based on what you're saying, that the grandma, Oleg's grandma and Oleg himself, they share similar character traits. So kind of she's his rock and he's her rock, because you say that he's very strong and you don't see him as somebody who's coping. He is there.
I know, he is surviving as a whole, but I also know that this conflict has left scars in him already. This is a 10-year-old who knows when the mortars are close enough to be afraid and when they're so distant that's just how it's. He knows weapon sounds that like no children on earth should know.
That's terrifying.
And he's grown accustomed to it. And in a lot of ways, in my personal opinion, I would be a little bit afraid that there's also a growing indifference to the war because it's so been traumatic. But that said, again, he has Alexandra. And that's what I think is a lot to do with spreading the warmth and the love in his life that he needs to cope.
Right, and going to kind of some of the darker parts in the film, a friend introduces Oleg to a handgun. Now, that is completely terrifying. A 10-year-old boy, he was 8 at the time.
No, he was not. He was 10 at that time.
Oh, he was 10 at the time. He's 10 at the time. He's being introduced to a gun. Your crew is filming this, a few meters away, however close they are. And then he does get hurt off a ricocheting bullet. Now, I don't know. I don't know how to ask this. But at what point did you want to step in?
There's been several times, in this film where I wanted to step in, where I did step in. But at some point, I also need to be truthful to the life that's actually being led out there, and to take a little bit pressure off, that situation. It isn't a real handgun; it's a pneumatic gun. And I played with these. Yeah, I know.
I mean,
but
he's a child.
But if they play around with it, 5 days a week, at some point I can't say you can't play around with it because then I'm constructing.
So you
a
had
world.
a talk with him. You had a talk with him about gun safety, I assume.
No, actually we didn't. What we would do, we would bring the med kit that I had for really serious injuries, and then we would, let things happen as things are.
But would you be worried that he's learning how to use this, not necessarily a real gun, but still a very real weapon?
There's several parts of this. First of all, I think in a way, from the very beginning, we've been shouting to these kids, please don't run over this field because there is a big possibility that there's been mines there. So if you gradient that down to a pneumatic gun, it's nothing compared to the other dangers. And I think in a certain way we also grow accustomed to the landscape and how things are here. Also, I was the first one to carry him home. We see Kostya doing that in the film, but usually we're taking home, we would make sure that he would go to the hospital. It's a difficult question. of when you're documenting reality. When do you step in? When do you let things play out?
Where do you draw the line for
There
yourself?
There isn't any real answer to that. It all depends on the situations. Sometimes you have to make snap decisions. Sometimes it's a good decision, and sometimes it's a bad decision. And that's what I have to live with. It's my responsibility in the end.
I see. And now, can you tell us the story behind the name of the film, The Distant Barking of Dogs?
It's because we realized that the soldiers were keeping dogs around because they're kind of like a primitive warning system, both because they can hear the mortars, but also because they bark if the enemy gets up close. And since the trenches were around 700 meters or something like that from the village, then there would be this barking of dogs in the distance. And to me, that became the symbolism of the war, not being quite there, but just on the other side of the hill that marked the village. And in that way, it was kind of like war coming, but not quite here yet.
Do you feel as if this movie in itself is a warning for all those who don't really realize that there's a war going on in Europe, and it hasn't ended, and it's still going on?
I think more than a warning, I think it's also a reminder of how do you survive in the best possible way under these circumstances. That's the human story that I would love for it to come across. That you have to lean on the ones that's close to you. You have to both take and give from them, and together that's when we're strongest.
I think that's an amazing message. I think we should leave it there. Thank you so much for joining me today. So we've been joined by Simon Lereng Wilmont, and you're watching UATV.